Good morning, good evening, and good night, everybody. My name is Sarah, and today we're doing my January wrap-up. Now, not gonna lie, this month was kind of a disappointment for me all in all. I did have one, maybe two, amazing, absolutely great books, but everything else I'm just kind of like, why? So I guess, with all that being said, let's dive on in. Now, the first book that I read this month was Wayward Sons, the sequel to Carry On. I absolutely love Carry On. Carry On's great. Carry On's amazing. Wayward Sons is not. Carry On is a great and amazing book. It's kind of a spoof on Harry Potter. It's a hidden magical world where our main character grew up outside of it, and he's taken to the magical world one day because he's the chosen one, until it's realized he's the worst chosen one to ever be chosen. He's absolutely awful at magic. His roommate, for the entire time he's living at Watford, this magical academy school, hates his gut. He swears that Bad's, his roommate's trying to kill him. He swears that Bad's a vampire, and all this stuff, and it ends up being a gay love story about overcoming trials and the consequences. And this book, it's all about the after. This book is the consequences, like what happens after you defeat the big bad and try to keep going on with your life. This is a much darker book. This does not start off in a good place. Simon Snow has depression. It's not good. And it focuses a lot on Simon's mental health. It focuses a lot on the consequences of what he had to give up in the first book in order to defeat the big bad. This book is all about Baz and Simon's and Penelope's road trip through America as they try to find Simon's ex-girlfriend who had left Watford without any magic. She went to go live in America, try to live a mundane life, and things start going down, and Penelope is really freaking out because she's not reaching any contact with her, and they're like concerned that stuff's going down. This book takes a lot of it focuses a lot on Baz's, fact that he's a vampire as well as Simon's mental health. It's, again, is a darker book, and that's what really bothered me about this, because Carry On was such a light-hearted and amazing book, and Wayward Sons is not that, and it took something away from the story. I knew it was the same characters, but they mentioned Watford, 3/4 of the way through the book, and I'm like, wait, this is the same universe. It was really, off-throwing, and I wanted to love this book because it was the sequel to Carry On, one of my favorite books of all times, but it just wasn't. So I originally gave this book 4 stars. I recently bumped it down to 3 just because of I'm looking back on it, and it's just because it has the same characters does not mean it's the same story, and I do not like this new story. So 3 stars. It wasn't awful, but I wouldn't recommend it. The next book is a completely different note, and that is The Eye of the World, Book 1 of The Wheel of Time. This monster floppy book, 5-star read. This, I listened to it on audiobook as well as reading it because high fantasy is really hard for me to just sit down and read, but also I can't have enough attention to the audiobook, so I dual read it. The audiobook's 36 hours. I listened to this in 2 or 3 days. It was amazing. It was stunning. It's all about this high fantasy world where I don't even know how to describe it. It's basically, it takes a lot of inspiration from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Our big magical person who's actually a young girl in this story, she wanders into this town on the very edge of the kingdom, don't even pay taxes because the tax collectors don't even go there. The world has basically forgotten this corner of the kingdom exists. And in this town, there are 3 people who all were born exactly around the same time of year, and there's something off about them. The town doesn't know it, but the town also kind of knows it. And so when this magical person shows up, she's like, hey, I could use you guys at some point in the future. She doesn't know what exactly, but it does. And then something goes down and she's like, shit, I gotta get out of Dodge, and takes the kids with her. And it's their journey trying to go stop, again, the big bad. They're traveling across the world, discovering about themselves, learning about magic, learning about the world outside of their little corner, their little town. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's a traveling book. It's really a traveling book, adventuring across the world that they never knew existed, learning about themselves, learning about magic. It was great. It was just, I cannot sing this book enough praise. It's only the first month of the year, but I can tell this is going to be one of my favorite books of the month. I really cannot wait to continue this series. It's ridiculously long, 800 pages. It's a tome. Audiobook's 36 hours, but I love it with all my heart. So 5 stars, amazing. The next book was an audiobook, and that was Lovely War. I DNF'd this book. Lovely War is a book where Aphrodite has to sit down her lover and her husband, Hephaestus and Ares, and she has to explain to them why love is always drawn to war, why these two cannot be separated. Even though Aphrodite is married to the god of blacksmithing and the forge, she's always going to be drawn to Ares. And she tells the story of World War I and the two love stories that come out of it. The story of love and music and war and how it's all brought together and how it's always going to be torn apart in the end. Love and war are always going to be drawn together, but in the end, that's not why they belong together. So I DNF'd this book, mostly because it was a romance. I really do not like romance. I was just sitting there and I'm like, okay, carry on with the plot. I'm done with the romance. And then I realized romance was the plot, and I'm like, I really tried to get through this. I couldn't even make it to 50% way through the book. Like, I was like, romance is just not for me. I'm like, I've been having good luck with the romance I've picked up recently. I'm like, I don't hate it, but at the same time, it's just, it could be more. And this one, if you love romance and you're interested in mythology, great book for you. I like mythology, and that's about it. So I DNF'd this book when I realized it had nothing for me. The next book I DNF'd was Circe, and okay, I know a lot of people love this book. It is not retelling, but it's more of a refocused on the story of Circe. Circe is a sorceress who was born from the Titan and a nymph, and she was the first child of these two that did not show any sign of being a Titan or a god or a nymph. She just was. No one knew what she was because she was the first of a kind. She ended up being the first sorceress. Magic is something that kind of always existed, but she learned to harness it. It's her story that we learn throughout the mythology, just condensed into one location. It's her loves and trials through humanity and just deities and the time and place she always struggles to find where she belongs. I DNF'd this book because it was incredibly passive. It was just Circe sitting down telling her story. It was, and then he looked at me and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, I don't mind past tense books. I really don't. But there was so little dialogue because she was always explaining how things looked and how things acted. It wasn't like a back and forth the way traditional novels are written. It was so incredibly passive, I couldn't give myself to care. Like, I was just sitting there and I'm like, I don't care. And I like mythology, I really do, but I had just gotten done reading Lovely War, or I just DNF Lovely War, and I started reading this and I'm like, it was getting to the romance plots, and I'm like, I don't care, and I don't want to go through this again, so I DNF'd it, and I'm like, I can't even bring myself to, think about picking it up again. I'm like, it was too passive, I don't care. So moving on from that, the next book I read was My Hero Vigilantes Volume 2. This is the spin-off series of My Hero Academia. I absolutely love My Hero Academia with all my heart. Vigilantes is written by a different author, set in the same universe. This is about 5 years before the present storyline in My Hero. My Hero is a very interesting universe because it's a universe where almost everyone is born with superpowers, and Japan, it's set up like they have very strict restrictions on who can use their superpowers. Like, they're called quirks. And you can only use your superpowers if you have a government, license to be hero. And that's very hard to get. So the vigilantes are people who, their powers aren't strong enough to do, the government license stuff, but they still want to help out. So they do things illegally. It's very much, this kind of is more of the American superhero story, doing things behind the government back to get what's right in the world, even with the consequences that are going to be given to you. My main problem with this series is that it does not shy away from fan service. My Hero isn't exactly shy about fan service either, but these characters are older, they're in college, so it's it's appropriate to do this now because I'm like, no, it's not. Because one of the characters, her costume butts out the entire time. And I'm like, I'm not sure I want to be reading this. But the storyline's really interesting. It's just all about heroes and vigilantes and villains and what can we do when we're not restricted by the law, which is, again, a very American story. I'm interested in. I don't know if I'm going to continue reading it. I don't rate manga because it's not a complete story. This is just a collection of chapters. So it was fun. It was interesting. I don't know if I'm going to pick the next volume up. The next one should not be any surprise to literally anyone. My Hero Academia Volume 22. This finally came out. I finally bought it. I'm so excited. Again, superpowers and awesomeness. Our main character in this story, he was one of the few people born without powers, and then the world's greatest superhero found him and he's like, hey, I like your spunk. My power is really rare because I can pass it on to you. I'm, in fact, the only person in the world who can pass on a quirk. And so it's all about a quirkless kid getting superpowers and going to high school to learn to become a government-sanctioned hero. And it's awesome and amazing. And right now they're at, how did I describe it? It's Class 1A versus Class 1B. They're learning to fight in, simulated battles, as a group. And it's really cool and really fascinating. And I love it. And I'm just... there's a plot point going on with Izuku's power. Izuku's the main character, and I'm so excited and I love it, and I cannot wait until the next volume comes out. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. The last manga I read this month is Blue Exorcist Volume 7. I've talked about Blue Exorcist a lot recently because I'm really getting into the series again. It is the story about the son of Satan who grew up in a monastery not realizing who his father was, and then one day something happens, and then Satan shows up and he kills Rin's, who are our main character, adopted father, and Rin's like, I'm gonna become an exorcist to kill my dad. And it's all about Rin, our main character, going to like an exorcist cram school and learning to how like hunt demons, even though he's half demon, and he has to keep his identity secret from everyone in the class. And it's so cool and awesome. Again, this arc is one that was not included in the anime. A lot of what happened in Blue Exorcist was like, the manga comes first, and then the anime adapts it, and then the anime just decided to cut an entire arc from the manga because it was focusing on the side characters, and I'm like, but the side characters are so cool. And so, of course, even though I've seen the anime, I need to read the manga because so much information was lost. Another book, I DNF'd. I told you it was kind of a rough month. And I think you guys are actually going to be mad at me for this. That's Amber Low. So I know a lot of people love this series with all their heart, and I'm like, no. The thing is, it like opens up on a sex scene, and I could already tell it wasn't going to be for me. I tried, I really did. I was really into like the Roaring 20s, like I wanted to get those kind of books like to start off the new year, and I'm like, it's 2020, I want to see the Art Deco, I want to see the speakies, I want to see the music and the outfits. I'm like, yes, this is so cool. And so this doesn't take place in our world. It's kind of like our world, but it's not. There's no magic, but it's very clearly a different world. It's all about these different factions of like detectives and like the mafia, and they're trying to essentially rule this city. And one of our like lead characters is in love. It's a gay romance, by the way, in love with one of the not good characters. So it's like very much forbidden romance between the detective and the mafia. And I'm like, no, because it's just, I don't mind, I mind romance, but I can get away with romance. But sex scenes, I'm just like, and I was listening to this on the audiobook, audiobooks and sex scenes are really weird because I'm like, somebody is telling me this, and that's really uncomfortable, and it was no. So I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pick this book up again, but if I do, it's definitely going to have to be physical. Like, there's no way I could listen to this audiobook. It was interesting, and I know why a lot of people like it. It's just not for me. The next book I read and finished is The Song of Achilles. This is by the same author who wrote Circe, and I was like really hesitant to pick this one up after Circe, but everyone's like, this book is so much better. Like, you have to read Circe first or else you're never going to be able to like read it after you read this, because this is amazing and beautiful. And I'm like, it's great and all. 4 stars though. So again, incredibly passive. This is told in the perspective of Patroclus. Achilles' best friend slash lover slash everything. So our perspective character, I'm just calling him Pro now. Our perspective character, Pro, he was cast out of his family's kingdom after killing a noble son by accident. He wasn't smart enough to lie about it. He just like, whoops, oh well. And his father's like, you are such an idiot. You cannot rule this kingdom. Go live in this kingdom where they take in orphaned and abandoned sons, and they just like go shoo. And in that kingdom, Pro meets Achilles. And it's all about them growing up together and them learning together. And Achilles is destined to be the greatest warrior of the Greeks. He is the son of a sea-nymph and a king. So he's not a half-god or demigod, whatever that is. He's not a demigod, but he definitely isn't mortal. And it's all about them growing up together and eventually going off to the Trojan War to try and rescue Helen. And what happens, and if you know mythology, the story doesn't end where you think it would end, especially with Patroclus as the perspective character. Like, it continues on, and it's very much, it is the mythology, but kind of told in more of a modern sense. Like, it's easier to understand. It's really fascinating. I really like it, but it's also, at the same time, incredibly passive. And I'm like, it doesn't make you love any of the characters. It doesn't leave you with a very satisfied ending. Like, it's a nice ending, but at the same time, I'm like, I know this was happening. I knew this was coming, but at the same time, I'm just like, there was some sort of disconnect with it. It's a great story. I just don't like how passive it was. This next book, I should have DNF'd. I don't know why I forced myself to read this. That's The Diviners. And I know so many of you guys are gonna hate me for saying this because I know this is a beloved series. I did not like it. I gave this book 2 stars. And I'm like, if it's a 3-star book, like I can tell that from the beginning, that's when I DNF a book. It was 2 stars and I kept forcing myself to read it. This, again, is a 1920s book. This one actually is set in our world, except there's people who are born with magical powers. Our main character can, she can take an object that means something to you, and she can tell you your deepest secrets. That's her power. And this book was so long. It was ridiculously long. It had no right to be that. You could have cut so much from the book. I think it was 13 hours the audiobook was. The inciting incident, or at least what I deemed what got the plot going. I'm like, oh yes, this is the plot. Here we go. It was 6 hours in. You could have cut the first 6 hours of this book. That's why I don't like it so much. It took so long to get to its point. Sure, you can say, oh, the inciting incidents when the main character left her hometown to move to New York. No, that's plot setting. That's building it up. That's not the inciting incidents. That's not what got the novel started. I don't know why I kept reading it. The more I think about it, the less I like this book. It was a very interesting concept. Because it's the main character lives with her uncle. Her uncle is the experts in the occult and the strange, and something occult and strange is going on, and the detectives come to her uncle and they're like, yeah, sure, we can help you. And then they're like, no, you can't really help. And then the ending. And I'm not a big fan of the ending. I'm really not. And the bad guy wasn't frightening, and it was supposed to be a murder mystery. And it wasn't a mystery. I mean, maybe. It was supposed to be, I don't know how to describe this, but I didn't like it. I did not like it. It tried to set up so many things, and it failed at all of it. And I know it's a 5-book series, and the last book just came out, maybe a month ago, and I'm like, no, I don't want to read this at all. I really don't like it. I really don't like it, you guys. The next book was also a book I DNF'd, and that is The Dragon Pearl. This is a Rick Riordan Presents, which means it wasn't by Uncle Rick, but it was sponsored by him. He's like, hey, look at all these other mythologies I don't know enough about, but these people do. You should read these books. This one was, I believe it was Korean inspired. Maybe it was Chinese. It was one of the two. And it was all about a half kitsune girl who lives in outer space, and she's going to go on an adventure to find a dragon pearl that's out there in the galaxy. And I'm like, I wasn't in the mood for sci-fi. I really wasn't. I wasn't liking the writing style. I'm normally a big fan of middle grade. I like middle grade books, but this one just felt, no. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know why I didn't think it was a sci-fi when I first picked it up, because I'm like, it kind of looks like a sci-fi, but for some reason I thought it was set in our world, but it wasn't. And the setting was what bothered me. I might try and pick this up later when I'm in the mood for sci-fi, because I normally like sci-fi, but this time it just wasn't for me. So I DNF'd it maybe probably within 25% of the book. The next book, again, was one I should have DNF'd. I don't know why I did not. I don't know why I forced myself to read this. That's Spin the Dawn. This was pitched as a Mulan / Project Runway story, and it's all about this girl who was from China, and her emperor is hey, your dad's the best tailor in the land. He has to go compete in this competition to be the imperial tailor. You have to go do this. This isn't a request. And her brother's they just got back from war, 2 of them died, and the 3rd one's crippled, and the father's grieving, and they don't have a mother, and she's I'm the best tailor in this household. I'm gonna cut my hair and go compete in this competition to be the best tailor. And that's cool and all. Magic's involved. And that plot, that entire thing that was the synopsis, ended about a third of the way in the book. And I'm like, okay, now what? Why is this book not over yet? That was the entire plot. That was everything it was set up to be. And then they're like, oh, no, you need to go on an adventure now to find these magical items. Go do that. And that took up the next third of the book. Probably more than a third of the book. It was almost over by the time that plot point was over. And I'm like, this felt like a completely different story. This also had a romance subplot, an adventure subplot, and magic and trials and tribulations. And I'm like, this is not the same story. You could have split this up into 3 different books, because the third one, maybe 2 books, because the third plot point is when they get everything. They're like, oh, we're gonna do this thing now. And I'm like, I don't care. The book should have ended when the competition ended. That was it. And also, they had a chance to make one of what's set up to be the conflict, the bad guy, the antagonist. They had a chance to really develop that character. And they set it up and they failed to do it. I know this book continues on later, but they're not going to follow that storyline. I can tell you how this book ended. They're not following that storyline. So I gave this book 2 stars, and I should have DNF'd it. Like, it's not bad enough to give a 1 star. It's very hard for me to give a 1 star because I liked the first third of the book. That was about it, though. Okay, now that we're done talking about that, we're going to end this on a high note, and we're going to talk about the Adventure Zone. Here They Be Gerblins. I've talked about this before. I love Dungeons and Dragons. I love, like, the concept of role-playing and fantasy. I need to find new people to play with because my old people were not the best. And I don't read manga, but this was a complete story. This was an entire story wrapped up in this little book. It's not that little. It's actually, like, fairly heavy and fairly dense. It was so much fun. I think, did I give this 4 or 5 stars? I think I gave this 5 stars. And I'm just like, it was so great and it was so wonderful. And it's basically just a campaign of 3 characters, like, they're going along. The dwarf character's like, hey, my cousins, like, wants us to do this thing. There's supposed to be a lot of money involved. And it's, like, really cool and it's really awesome. And you get to see the dungeon master pop in every now and then. Like, he's giving the characters tips and, like, this is what goes on in your head while you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. And it's so cool and it's so amazing and I love it. And there's a couple of characters and here I am, like, if I was playing this, I would have gotten emotionally attached to, like, this, like, side character and they would be on this adventure with us. Obviously, they didn't do that, but, like, there's so much in this that I knew I would have fallen in love with if I was playing the game. I know The Adventure Zone is a podcast. I haven't gotten around to listening to that yet, but I might because this was so much fun. And, like, they have a portion in the back with fan art, and I'm in love with this, you guys. So I need to go pick up the next volume or next book of this because it's so good. It's so much fun, and I can't stop talking about this. Like, I had a great month in terms of graphic novels and mangas. That was not so much, but, like, this one, it was amazing. So that is everything I read / listened to in the month of January. Some highs, some lows, some things I really regret. But if you want me to go and attempt to read the books that I DNF'd, I think I gave my reasoning pretty well. But if you want to change my mind, please leave that down in the comment section down below. And while you're there, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And as always, good night, good evening, and good morning, everyone.